The snow fell so thick that Hannah Thompson could no longer see her own hands when she held them 6 inches from her face, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that if she did not find shelter within the hour, the Arizona desert would claim her frozen corpse before dawn. The irony was not lost on her that she had left Missouri to escape the bitter winters, only to find herself caught in a freak December blizzard in the Arizona territory, where such weather should have been impossible. Yet here she was, stumbling through drifts that reached her knees, her threadbare coat doing nothing to keep out the wind that cut through fabric and flesh like a butcher's blade. She had been traveling alone for 3 weeks, ever since her employer's family in Tucson had decided they no longer needed a governess. The children had been sent east to boarding school, and Hannah had been given 2 weeks' wages and a polite dismissal. At 22 years old, she had thought herself capable of making the journey south to Naco, Arizona, where she had heard there were teaching positions available at the mission school. The stage had broken an axle 2 days into the journey, and the driver had assured her they would have it fixed within hours. When night fell and he still struggled with the repair, Hannah had volunteered to walk to the ranch house they had passed a mile back to ask for help. That had been her mistake. The storm had come from nowhere, turning the desert landscape into a white hell. She had lost sight of the road within minutes, and now she had no idea if she was walking toward the ranch or away from everything. Her feet had gone numb an hour ago, and she could no longer feel her fingers despite keeping them tucked under her arms. The wind howled around her like a living thing, and she found herself thinking of her mother's grave back in Missouri, wondering if she would end up in an unmarked plot in this God-forsaken territory. Through the sheets of snow, she caught a glimpse of something dark, a structure of some kind. Hannah forced her legs to move faster, though they felt like lead weights. As she drew closer, she could make out the shape of a barn, and beyond it, the outline of a ranch house with smoke rising from its chimney. The sight of that smoke nearly made her weep with relief. She stumbled toward the house, falling twice before she reached the porch steps. Her voice came out as barely a whisper when she tried to call out. Hannah raised her fist and pounded on the door with the last of her strength, then slumped against the doorframe as her legs finally gave out beneath her. The door opened so suddenly that she nearly fell inside. Strong hands caught her before she could hit the ground, and she found herself looking up into the face of a man who seemed carved from the same rough timber as his house. He had dark hair that fell past his collar, weather-beaten skin, and eyes the color of warm whiskey that widened in surprise at the sight of her. "Good God," he said, and his voice was deep and rough like gravel underfoot. "Get inside now." He did not wait for her to respond, simply scooped her up as though she weighed nothing and carried her through the door, kicking it shut behind them. The warmth of the house hit her like a physical blow, and Hannah gasped as feeling began to return to her extremities in painful pins and needles. The man carried her to a chair near the fireplace and set her down with surprising gentleness. "Can you speak? Tell me your name." "Hannah," she managed through chattering teeth. "Hannah Thompson. Please, I need shelter, just until the storm passes." He was already moving, pulling off her sodden coat and wrapping a thick wool blanket around her shoulders. "You will have shelter. That is not something you need to worry about." He knelt before her and began unlacing her boots with quick, efficient movements. "These are soaked through. We need to get them off before you lose your toes." Hannah wanted to protest, to say this was improper, but the words would not come. She watched as he removed her boots and stockings, revealing feet that were an alarming shade of blue-white. His hands were warm as he chafed her feet between his palms, working to restore circulation. "I am Reed Mercer," he said as he worked. This is my ranch about 5 miles north of Naco. How long were you out in that storm? I do not know, Hannah admitted. Hours, I think. The stage broke down. I was trying to find help. Reed's jaw tightened. The driver let you go alone in this weather. He did not know the storm would come so quickly. None of us did. Reed made a sound that suggested he did not agree with this assessment, but he said nothing more as he continued to work on her feet. Gradually, the blue-white color began to fade to pink, and Hannah could feel the painful tingling intensify as blood flow returned. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. I know it hurts, Reed said quietly, but it means you will keep your toes. Can you feel your fingers? Hannah tried to move them and winced. Yes, barely. He stood and moved to a cupboard, pulling out a bottle and a glass. Drink this. It will help warm you from the inside. The whiskey burned going down, but she could feel its warmth spreading through her chest. Reed returned to the fire and stirred something in a pot hanging over the flames. The smell of beef stew made her stomach growl audibly. When did you last eat? He asked without turning around. Yesterday morning. He ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her, along with a thick slice of bread. Eat slowly. Your stomach will not thank you if you rush. Hannah wanted to devour the food, but she forced herself to take small bites. The stew was simple but delicious, rich with beef and vegetables. Reed watched her eat for a moment, then seemed satisfied she would not choke and turned his attention to her wet clothes hanging over a chair near the fire. These need to dry properly. I will get you something to wear. He disappeared into another room and returned with a shirt and a pair of wool socks that would have fit a child on him but would be enormous on her. It is not much, but it will be warm and dry. There is a screen in the corner you can change behind. Hannah looked at the clothes, then at him. You live here alone? Yes, my wife died 4 years ago, influenza, I am sorry. He nodded once, a sharp movement that suggested the grief was still fresh despite the years. Change, I will turn my back. She did as he instructed, grateful for the privacy even though they were the only 2 people in the house. The shirt fell to her knees and the socks came up past her calves. She felt ridiculous, but she was warm and dry, and that was worth any embarrassment. When she emerged from behind the screen, Reed had prepared a pallet on the floor near the fire, piling it with quilts and pillows. You will sleep here tonight. It is the warmest spot in the house. Where will you sleep? My room. Do not worry about me. Hannah sat down on the edge of the pallet, still holding the bowl of stew. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. I do not know what I would have done if I had not found your house. You would have frozen to death, he said bluntly. This storm is not natural. I have lived in Arizona for 15 years and never seen anything like it. How long do you think it will last? He moved to the window and peered out into the white darkness. Impossible to say. Could be over by morning, could last days. Either way, you are stuck here until it passes and I can take you wherever you need to go. I was heading to Naco. There is supposed to be a teaching position at the mission school. Father Miguel mentioned they were looking for someone. You are a teacher then. I was a governess in Tucson. Before that, I taught in a school in Missouri. Reed nodded and returned to his chair near the fire. He picked up a piece of leather he had been working and began stitching it with steady, practiced movements. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Hannah finished her stew and set the bowl aside. Despite the warmth and the food, exhaustion was pulling at her like a lead weight. Her eyes kept drifting shut and she had to force them open. Sleep, Reed said without looking up from his work. You are safe here. She wanted to stay awake, to prove she was not some helpless woman who needed to be taken care of, but her body had other ideas. She lay down on the pallet and pulled the quilts up to her chin. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Reed Mercer sitting by the fire, keeping watch like a guardian against the storm. When Hannah woke, pale morning light was filtering through the windows, and the sound of wind had diminished to a low moan. She sat up, disoriented for a moment before memory returned. The house was warm and she could smell coffee and bacon. Reed stood at the stove, his back to her. He had changed into fresh clothes, and his dark hair was still damp from washing. He must have heard her stirring because he spoke without turning around. Storm broke about an hour ago. Still coming down, but not as hard. We are probably stuck here for at least another day or two. Hannah stood and folded the quilts, trying to make herself useful. Is there anything I can do to help? Can you cook? Yes. Then you can make yourself useful while you are here. I am not much of a cook beyond the basics. He turned and offered her a cup of coffee. There is a trunk in the spare room with some of my wife's clothes. They might fit you, better than wearing my shirt all day. The mention of his wife created an awkward moment, but Hannah pushed through it. Thank you. That is very kind. After breakfast, Reed showed her to the spare room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a trunk at its foot. He opened the trunk and stepped back, gesturing for her to look through it. Take whatever you need. Alina would have wanted them to be used. He left her alone, and Hannah knelt beside the trunk. The clothes inside were simple but well made, the kind of practical dresses a ranch wife would wear. She selected a dark blue wool dress that looked like it might fit and held it up against herself. Reed Mercer had been taller than Hannah but similarly built. Hannah changed quickly and found the dress fit reasonably well, though she had to roll the hem up a few inches. There was a mirror on the wall, and she caught sight of herself in it. Her blonde hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, and her face was pale with dark circles under her eyes. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had nearly died in a snowstorm. She found a brush in the trunk and worked through the tangles, then braided her hair and pinned it up in a simple knot. It was not perfect, but it was respectable. She took a deep breath and returned to the main room. Reed was at the table, working on the leather piece from the night before. He looked up when she entered and nodded approvingly. That fits you well. Thank you again for your kindness. I promise I will repay you somehow. There is nothing to repay. This is what people do out here. We help each other survive. He set down his work and stood. Since we are stuck together for a while, I should show you around. If I am out working and you need something, you should know where things are. He gave her a tour of the house, which was larger than it had seemed the night before. Besides the main room with its fireplace and kitchen area, there were 3 bedrooms and a small room that Reed used as an office. Everything was neat and well maintained, though there was a masculine sparseness to the place that spoke of a man living alone. The well is out back, but I brought in plenty of water last night before the storm got too bad, Reed explained. There is a root cellar under the kitchen with food stores. The privy is behind the house, but use the chamber pot if you need to during the night. No sense freezing yourself when we just got you warmed up. Hannah felt herself blushing at the frank discussion, but appreciated his practicality. This was not the polite society of Thompson. This was survival on the frontier, and there was no room for false modesty. What do you do here? I mean, what kind of ranch is this? Cattle mostly. I have about 200 head grazing on my land, some horses too. I sell the cattle in Thompson twice a year and break horses for extra money. You have help. I have 2 ranch hands, Jose and his son Miguel. They live in the bunkhouse about a quarter-mile from here. They are probably snowed in too, but they have plenty of supplies. Reed moved to the window and looked out at the white landscape. The cattle should be all right. They know where to find shelter in weather like this. We will check on them once the storm clears completely. The day passed slowly. Reed went out twice to check on the animals in the barn and to bring in more firewood. Hannah busied herself by cleaning the already clean house and preparing a proper dinner from the supplies in the root cellar. She made a stew similar to the one Reed had given her the night before, but added dumplings and herbs she found in the kitchen. When Reed came in from his second trip outside, stamping snow off his boots, he stopped and sniffed the air. "That smells better than anything I have made in months." They ate together at the table, and Hannah found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Reed was not a talkative man, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and deliberate. He asked her about her teaching experience, and she told him about the children she had tutored in Tucson. "You must miss them," he said. "I do, but they did not need me anymore. Their parents wanted them to have a proper education back east." "And you ended up stranded in the desert during a blizzard." Hannah laughed, surprising herself. "When you put it that way, it sounds like I made some terrible decisions. Or maybe you were meant to end up here." Reed said it so matter-of-factly that Hannah did not know how to respond. He seemed to realize what he had said and cleared his throat. "I mean, perhaps this is where you were supposed to end up, at the mission school. Perhaps." That night, Reed insisted she take the spare bedroom while he slept in his own room. Hannah tried to protest, but he was adamant that she should have privacy. She lay in the narrow bed, wrapped in quilts, and listened to the wind rattling the windows. Despite being in a stranger's house, she felt safer than she had in months. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm finally blown out. The world outside was transformed into a glittering white wonderland that seemed impossible in the desert landscape. Reed was already up and dressed when Hannah emerged from her room. "I need to check on Jose and Miguel, make sure they made it through all right," he said. "You should stay here where it is warm." "I would like to come with you if that is all right. I have been cooped up for 2 days and I could use the fresh air." Reed looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. "Dress warm. The snow is deep." They bundled up in coats and boots. Reed had extra work boots that he stuffed with rags to make them fit Hannah's smaller feet. It was clumsy, but it worked. They set out across the white landscape, following what Reed said was the path to the bunkhouse, though Hannah could see no sign of it under the snow. The walk was difficult, the snow in some places reaching Hannah's thighs. Reed broke trail ahead of her, and she followed in his footsteps. Despite the cold and the exertion, she found herself enjoying the exercise. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the sun glinted off the snow like diamonds. The bunkhouse appeared out of the whiteness, a small, sturdy structure with smoke rising from its chimney. Before they reached it, the door opened and 2 men emerged. The older one was short and stocky with graying hair and a weathered face. The younger was tall and lean, probably in his early 20s. "Mr. Mercer," the older man called out. "We were about to set out to check on you." "We are fine, Jose. Made it through with no problems." Reed gestured to Hannah. "This is Miss Thompson. She got caught in the storm 2 nights ago. She was on her way to Naco." Jose removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Miss Thompson, I am Jose Ruiz and this is my son Miguel." Miguel also removed his hat, his dark eyes curious. "You are very lucky, Miss Thompson. That storm was dangerous." "I know. Mr. Mercer saved my life." Reed looked uncomfortable with the praise. "We need to check on the cattle, make sure none of them got caught out in the open." The 4 of them spent the next several hours trudging through the snow, checking on the scattered groups of cattle. Most had found shelter in the low-lying areas and were fine, though cold and hungry. Reed and his men broke open bales of hay and spread them around for the animals. Hannah stayed back and watched them work. There was a rhythm to it, an understanding between the 3 men that came from years of working together. Reed moved with confidence despite the difficult conditions, and she found herself admiring his competence. By the time they returned to the ranch house, the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon. Jose and Miguel headed back to the bunkhouse, but not before Jose pulled Reed aside for a quiet conversation. Hannah could not hear what they were saying, but she saw Reed shake his head firmly and Jose shrug in response. Inside, Hannah started dinner while Reed tended to the fire. They had fallen into an easy partnership over the past 2 days, each taking on tasks without needing to discuss it. It felt natural in a way that surprised Hannah. She had been on her own for so long, relying only on herself, that she had forgotten what it was like to share space with someone else. "What did Jose say to you outside?" she asked as they ate. Reed hesitated, then seemed to decide there was no point in hiding it. "He wanted to know if I needed him to escort you to Naco tomorrow. The roads should be clear enough by then." "Oh." Hannah was surprised by the disappointment that flashed through her. "That makes sense. I have imposed on your hospitality long enough." "You have not imposed. I offered shelter and I meant it." Reed set down his fork and met her eyes across the table. "But you have your life to get to, that teaching position." "Yes, the teaching position." Hannah looked down at her plate. "You must think I am foolish traveling alone like I did. I think you are brave or desperate, maybe both. Definitely both." She managed a small smile. "I did not have many options. When the family in Tucson let me go, I had barely enough money for the stage fare to Naco. If I had stayed in Tucson trying to find another position, my savings would have run out before I found anything." "Why did you come to Arizona in the first place?" Hannah was quiet for a moment, considering how much to tell him. But there was something about Reed Mercer that invited honesty. "My parents died 2 years ago. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I had no other family and no real prospects in Missouri. A woman alone needs to work, and teaching was the only respectable option available to me. When I saw an advertisement for a governess position in Tucson, it seemed like an opportunity to start fresh somewhere new. I am sorry about your parents. Thank you. I know you understand loss." Reed nodded slowly. "Eleanor and I had been married for 5 years when she got sick. We were trying to have children, but it never happened. Then the influenza came through and she was gone in 3 days. He paused, his hands tightening on his fork. "I kept thinking I should have done more, gotten her to a doctor sooner or something. You cannot blame yourself for illness. I know that in my head, my heart is slower to catch up." They sat in silence for a while, 2 people united by loss and circumstance. When Hannah finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Do you think you will ever marry again?" "I did not think so. For a long time, I could not imagine anyone else in Eleanor's place." He met her eyes. "Lately, I have started to wonder if I was wrong about that." The air between them suddenly felt charged with something Hannah could not quite name. She dropped her gaze, her heart beating faster. Reed stood abruptly. "I should check on the horses." He grabbed his coat and left before Hannah could respond. She sat at the table, her dinner forgotten, trying to understand what had just happened. Had he been suggesting what she thought he was suggesting? Or was she reading too much into a simple statement? She cleaned up from dinner and was washing the dishes when Reed returned. He stamped snow off his boots and hung up his coat, then came to stand beside her at the basin. "I need to apologize," he said. "That was inappropriate of me." "What was?" "What I said about marriage. You are here as a guest and I had no right to make you uncomfortable." Hannah dried her hands on a towel and turned to face him. "You did not make me uncomfortable." "No, no." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "Reed, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course. When Jose offered to escort me to Naco tomorrow, why did you tell him no?" Reed was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. Because I am not ready for you to leave yet. Hannah's heart skipped. Why not? Because in 2 days, you have brought more life into this house than I have felt in 4 years. Because I enjoy talking to you. Because when I came back tonight and saw the lamp lit in the window, I realized how lonely I have been. He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable with his own honesty. I know that is selfish. You have your own plans, your own life, but you asked for honesty, and that is the truth. Hannah stepped closer to him. What if I told you I do not want to leave tomorrow either? Then I would say you are welcome to stay as long as you like. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin. But I would also ask what that means, for both of us. I think it means we should find out if this connection we both feel is real. Reed leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away. She did not. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and questioning, nothing like the rough cowboy she might have expected. Hannah leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. When they finally broke apart, Reed rested his forehead against hers. Stay, not as a guest. Stay and let me court you properly. What about the teaching position? If you still want it after a few weeks, I will take you to Naco myself. But give me a chance to prove that you might want to stay here instead. Hannah knew she should be cautious. She had only known this man for 3 days, but there was something about Reed Mercer that felt like home in a way nothing had since her parents died. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe she would regret it, but maybe, just maybe, this was the fresh start she had been looking for. All right, she said. I will stay. The next week passed in a blur of activity. The snow began to melt under the strong Arizona sun, though it took longer than Hannah would have expected. She and Reed fell into a comfortable routine. She cooked and kept house, and he worked on the ranch with Jose and Miguel. In the evenings, they talked for hours, learning about each other's lives and dreams. Reed was a thoughtful man, quick to listen and slow to judge. He had been born in Texas and come to Arizona as a young man looking for opportunity. He had built his ranch from nothing, working as a ranch hand for other men until he had saved enough to buy his own land. Meeting a leaner had been the best thing that ever happened to him, he said, and losing her had been the worst. Hannah told him about growing up in Missouri, about her parents who had encouraged her education despite the expense. She told him about the loneliness of being a governess, always part of a family but never truly belonging to it. She told him about her dreams of having her own home, her own family, a place where she truly belonged. You could have that here, Reed said one evening as they sat by the fire. If that is what you want. Is that what you want? I want you to be happy. If that means I court you for 6 months before proposing, I will do that. If it means waiting a year, I will wait. But yes, Hannah, I want you to stay. I want to build a life with you. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. I have not known you very long. No, but sometimes you know, deep down you just know. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I do know, it terrifies me, but I know. What terrifies you? That I will wake up and find this was all a dream. That I will lose you like I lost everyone else I have ever loved. Reed put his arm around her and pulled her close. Life does not come with guarantees. I learned that when a leaner died, but I also learned that hiding from pain means hiding from joy. I would rather have whatever time we get together than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. You are wiser than you look, Reed Mercer. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. I will take that as a compliment. 2 weeks after the storm, Reed took Hannah into Naco so she could inquire about the teaching position. The mission school was a simple adobe building attached to a small church. Father Miguel was a kind man in his 50s who welcomed them warmly. Miss Thompson, I received word that you might be coming, he said. Though I heard the stage broke down, I trust you found shelter during that terrible storm. I found shelter with Mr. Mercer, Hannah said. He has been very kind. Father Miguel's eyes twinkled. I see. Well, the teaching position is still available if you want it, though I suspect that may no longer be the case. Hannah glanced at Reed, who stood quietly beside her, his hat in his hands. She had thought long and hard about this decision over the past week. The practical part of her brain said she should take the teaching position, establish her independence, not rely on a man she had only known for 2 weeks. But her heart said something else entirely. Father, I am grateful for the opportunity, but I will not be taking the position. I have decided to stay at the Mercer Ranch. The priest nodded knowingly. I thought as much. Well, if things change, the door is always open, and I hope to see you both at Mass on Sundays. You will, Reed said firmly, speaking for the first time. He took Hannah's hand. Thank you, Father. They left the mission and walked through the small town of Naco. It was a quiet place, a mix of Mexican and American influence that reflected its position near the border. There was a general store, a saloon, a few other businesses. Reed took her into the store and told her to pick out fabric for new dresses. You cannot keep wearing Alina's clothes, he said. You need your own things. Hannah selected several lengths of fabric, practical calicos, and one nice cotton for church. Reed paid without hesitation and added a bolt of white linen to the order. What is that for? Hannah asked. A wedding dress, if you will have me. Hannah's breath caught. Reed, we have not even talked about marriage, not seriously. I am talking about it now. Marry me, Hannah. I know it is fast, but I also know I do not want to spend another day without you in my life. Not as a guest, not as someone who is just staying temporarily. As my wife. People in the store were starting to stare, but Hannah did not care. She threw her arms around Reed's neck. Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Reed picked her up and spun her around, laughing in a way she had never heard from him before. The storekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Chen, clapped her hands together in delight. A wedding. How wonderful. When is the happy day? Reed looked at Hannah. How long do you need to make a dress? 2 weeks, maybe 3. 3 weeks then. Father Miguel, you will marry us. It would be my honor, the priest said. He had apparently followed them into the store. But I will need to do some counseling sessions with you both first. Make sure you are entering into this sacrament with clear eyes and full hearts. Over the next 3 weeks, Hannah threw herself into preparing for the wedding. Mrs. Chen helped her sew her dress, and several other women from town came to help once word spread about the wedding. It seemed everyone in Naco knew Reed Mercer, and was delighted to see him finding happiness again. Hannah met more of Reed's friends and neighbors. There was the Zhang family who ran the general store, the Rodriguez family who owned land adjoining Reed's ranch, and various ranchers and townspeople who all welcomed Hannah warmly. She had worried about being accepted, a stranger coming in and marrying one of their own, but those fears proved groundless. The counseling sessions with Father Miguel were enlightening. He asked them hard questions about their expectations for marriage, about children, about how they would handle disagreements. Hannah appreciated his thoroughness. It forced her and Reed to have conversations they might have otherwise put off. I want children, Reed said during one session. But I know that might be difficult. Alina and I tried for years without success. I do not know if the problem was with her or with me. I want children too, Hannah said, but if it does not happen, that will not change how I feel about you. What about your teaching? Father Miguel asked. Will you continue that? I would like to, in some capacity. Perhaps I could tutor children in the area who cannot make it to school regularly. Reed nodded. I think that is a fine idea. The day of the wedding arrived on a bright January morning. The snow had long since melted, and the desert had returned to its normal sunny self. Hannah dressed in her white linen gown with its simple lines and pearl buttons. Mrs. Chen had lent her a lace veil that had belonged to her mother, and several of the women from town came to help her get ready. "You are a beautiful bride," Mrs. Chen said, adjusting the veil. "Reed Mercer is a lucky man." "I think I am the lucky one," Hannah said. "I nearly froze to death in that storm, and instead I found a home." The ceremony was held in the mission church, which was packed with people. Hannah was surprised by how many had turned out. It seemed like everyone in Naco and the surrounding ranches had come to witness Reed Mercer's second wedding. Jose walked Hannah down the aisle in lieu of her father. Miguel played guitar, providing music for the procession. And at the end of the aisle stood Reed, wearing a new suit and looking more handsome than Hannah had ever seen him. His eyes never left her face as she walked toward him. The ceremony was beautiful. Father Miguel spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad. When it came time to exchange vows, Reed's voice was steady and sure. "Hannah, I promise to love you and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams, and to build a home with you where we both belong. You walked into my life during a storm, and you brought the sunshine back. I will never take that for granted." Hannah had to blink back tears as she recited her own vows. "Reed, I promise to love you with all my heart. I promise to be your companion and your partner. You gave me shelter when I needed it most, and you gave me something even more precious, a place to call home. I will spend the rest of my life showing you how grateful I am for that gift." When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Reed kissed her with a tenderness that made Hannah's heart swell. The church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors and friends bringing food and drink. Long tables were set up in the yard, and someone brought a fiddle for dancing. Hannah danced with Reed, with Jose, with Miguel, and with several other men from town whose names she was still learning. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Reed pulled Hannah aside. They walked a short distance from the house, far enough that the noise faded to a pleasant hum in the background. "Happy?" Reed asked, putting his arms around her waist. "Happier than I thought possible." Hannah leaned back against his chest, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "A month ago I was alone and desperate, and now I have all this. You have always had this. It was just waiting for you to find it. Do you really believe that?" "I do. I think some things are meant to be, and we were meant to find each other." He turned her to face him. "That storm brought you to me, and I will be grateful for it for the rest of my life. Even though I almost died, even then, though I am glad you survived." Hannah laughed and pulled him down for a kiss. In the distance, she could hear their guests celebrating, but in this moment, it was just the two of them under the vast Arizona sky. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Hannah had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, which were dictated by weather and seasons and the needs of animals. There were times when Reed was gone from dawn until well after dark, working with the cattle or fixing fences, or dealing with one of the 100 other tasks that came with running a ranch. But there were good times too. Sunday dinners with Jose and Miguel, who had become like family. Trips into Naco for supplies that turned into social events as Hannah got to know the townspeople better. Quiet evenings by the fire, reading or sewing or simply talking. And the nights when Reed held her close and made her feel more cherished than she had ever thought possible. Hannah started tutoring 3 children from neighboring ranches, teaching them reading and arithmetic 2 afternoons a week. The parents paid her with eggs, vegetables, or whatever they could spare, and Hannah found she enjoyed the work. She had missed teaching more than she realized. The second year brought a terrible drought that tested everyone's resolve. The creek that ran through Reed's property dried to a trickle, and they had to haul water for the cattle from a spring 2 miles away. Several ranchers lost most of their herds, but Reed's careful management and the deep well on his property allowed them to weather the crisis with losses but no catastrophe. It was also the year Hannah realized she was pregnant. She had begun to think it might not happen for them, just as it had not happened for Reed and Alina. But one morning, she woke up feeling sick, and by the end of the week, she was sure. Mrs. Cheng confirmed it, and Hannah found herself both thrilled and terrified. She told Reed that night after dinner. He had been tired from a long day of work, but the exhaustion vanished from his face when she spoke the words. "A baby. Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. Mrs. Chen says I am probably about 2 months along." Reed pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I was starting to think it might not happen. I know, so was I. We are going to have a family." His voice was thick with emotion. "We already have a family," Hannah said, touching his face. "But yes, we are going to expand it." The pregnancy was not easy. Hannah was sick for the first 4 months, barely able to keep anything down. Reed worried constantly, bringing her water and crackers and anything else she thought she might be able to eat. Mrs. Cheng came out to the ranch regularly to check on her, and Father Miguel blessed her and the baby. But as the months passed, Hannah began to feel better. Her belly swelled, and she felt the baby move for the first time in her 5th month. Reed's hand was on her stomach when it happened, and the look of wonder on his face made all the discomfort worthwhile. "I felt that," he said, his voice hushed. Our baby, Hannah agreed. As her due date approached, Reed became increasingly protective. He did not want her doing anything strenuous, which drove Hannah crazy since she felt fine and wanted to keep active. They compromised, with Hannah doing light housework and cooking while Reed took on everything else. Jose and Miguel pitched in too, making sure Reed could spend more time at the house as Hannah's delivery approached. The whole community seemed invested in the baby's arrival. Women from town brought baby clothes they had sewn, blankets, and advice. The baby came on a hot August morning in 1878, 3 years almost to the day since Hannah had stumbled out of that snowstorm and into Reed's life. Mrs. Chen served as midwife, with 2 other women from town assisting. Reed paced outside the bedroom, nearly wearing a hole in the floor. When the baby's cry finally filled the air, Reed burst through the door despite Mrs. Chen's protests that he should wait. He found Hannah propped up against the pillows, sweaty and exhausted but smiling with a bundle wrapped in blankets in her arms. "A boy," she said. "We have a son." Reed crossed the room in 3 strides and looked down at the red-faced, squalling infant. "He is perfect. He has your nose." "Poor kid." Reed touched the baby's tiny hand and the infant's fingers wrapped around his thumb. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months without settling on anything, but looking at their son, Hannah knew exactly what felt right. "James. After my father, James Mercer." Reed tested the name. "I like it. James Thomas Mercer, so he has your family name too." The first months of James's life were exhausting and wonderful. He was a fussy baby who seemed to have his days and nights confused, but Hannah and Reed took turns walking him when he cried. Jose and Miguel doted on the boy, and the parade of visitors from town seemed endless. Everyone wanted to see the Mercer baby. As James grew, his personality began to emerge. He was curious and active, crawling early and getting into everything. Reed built a playpen to contain him, but James figured out how to escape it within a week. Hannah found herself constantly chasing after him, making sure he did not get into trouble. "He is going to be a handful," Reed said one evening, watching James pull himself up on the furniture for the 100th time, only to fall on his padded bottom. "He gets that from you." "Me, I am perfectly well behaved," Hannah laughed. "That is not what Jose told me. He said you were the most stubborn ranch hand he ever worked with. Stubborn is different than being a handful." "Whatever you say, dear." 2 years after James was born, Hannah found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier. She knew what to expect, and her body seemed to handle it better. Reed was still protective but less frantic, and James provided welcome distraction. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace Reed Mercer, arrived on a cool spring morning. She was smaller than James had been, with a tuft of dark hair and Hannah's blue eyes. James, now a rambunctious 2-year-old, was fascinated by his baby sister. "Gentle," Hannah reminded him constantly as he tried to pet Grace's head. "She is very small." James would nod seriously and touch her with one careful finger, then go back to his toys. But Hannah often caught him standing by Grace's cradle, watching her sleep. The ranch prospered as the years passed. Reed expanded his herd and bought more land. Jose and Miguel were joined by 2 more ranch hands as the work increased. Hannah continued tutoring, now teaching 6 children from various families in the area. Grace and James grew, becoming playmates and partners in mischief. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and floods, sick cattle and broken fences. There was the time James fell from the fence and broke his arm, sending Hannah into a panic. There was the terrible week when Grace had a fever that would not break, and Hannah and Reed took turns sitting up with her, bathing her with cool water and praying. But there were far more good times than bad. There were Christmas celebrations with the whole community, summer picnics by the creek when it was running, Sunday dinners after church. There were quiet evenings when the children were in bed and Hannah and Reed could sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Reed presented Hannah with a gift. It was a small wooden box beautifully carved. "What is this?" she asked, turning it over in her hands. "Open it." Inside was a deed. Hannah read it, then read it again to make sure she understood. "You put the ranch in both our names. It has always been as much yours as mine. I just made it official." Reed took her hand. "Everything I have, everything I am, I share with you. I wanted the paperwork to reflect that." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "That is the most romantic thing you have ever done. More romantic than marrying you 3 weeks after we met." "Well, that was pretty romantic too." Reed pulled her close. "I love you, Hannah Mercer. Every single day I wake up grateful that you knocked on my door during that storm." "I love you too. You told me I would never have to ask for shelter again, and you meant it. You gave me a home, a family, a life I never dreamed possible." We gave each other all of that. They stood together on the porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the house behind them, they could hear James and Grace playing, their laughter ringing out. The cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere Jose was singing in Spanish as he worked. It was not the life Hannah had planned when she boarded that stage to Naco all those years ago. It was better. She had set out looking for a teaching position, a way to support herself. Instead, she had found a partner, a home, and a love that sustained her through every challenge. As the years continued to pass, the Mercer family became a fixture in the Naco community. James grew into a strong young man who loved working with the cattle, though he also had a good head for numbers and helped Reed manage the business side of the ranch. Grace proved to be every bit as stubborn as her brother, with a gift for handling horses that amazed everyone who saw her ride. When James was 12 and Grace was 10, Hannah found herself pregnant again, much to everyone's surprise. She was 36 by then and had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. But their third child, a boy they named Thomas after Hannah's surname, arrived healthy and strong. Thomas was different from his siblings, quieter and more thoughtful. He loved books and learning, and Hannah suspected he would be the one to pursue education beyond what she could teach him at home. Reed supported this, setting aside money for Thomas's schooling when the time came. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Reed became known throughout the territory as a fair dealer and an excellent judge of cattle. Hannah's tutoring had evolved into a small school that she ran from a room Reed built onto the house specifically for that purpose. At any given time, she had 10 to 15 students of various ages, teaching them not just reading and arithmetic, but also history and geography. As their 20th wedding anniversary approached, Hannah found herself reflecting on the unlikely series of events that had brought her to this place. That terrible storm that could have killed her, Reed's kindness in taking in a stranger, the instant connection they had felt, the decision to take a chance on love even when it seemed impractical and rushed. She had told Reed once that she was afraid she would wake up and find it was all a dream. But 20 years later, she knew this was real. The gray in Reed's hair, the calluses on his hands, the laugh lines around his eyes, the children they had raised together, the ranch they had built into something substantial, all of it was gloriously, beautifully real. On the morning of their anniversary, Reed woke her before dawn. "Get dressed. I want to show you something." Hannah dressed quickly and followed him outside. He led her not toward the barn or the pastures, but up a small hill behind the house that overlooked their property. They had walked up there before, but not often. As they reached the top, Hannah gasped. Reed had built a bench there, simple but sturdy, with their names and wedding date carved into the back. Around it, he had planted wildflowers that were just beginning to bloom in the morning light. "I wanted us to have a place to come," Reed said, "to sit and remember, to look at what we have built together." Hannah sat down on the bench and Reed sat beside her. From this vantage point, they could see almost their entire property. The house with its additions and outbuildings, the barn and corrals, the pastures where their cattle grazed, the creek, running strong after good winter rains. In the distance, the small schoolhouse building, and beyond all of that, the desert stretching away toward the mountains. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Hannah asked. "When I thanked you for taking me in, I said a lot of things that night. You said this is what people do out here, we help each other survive." Hannah took his hand. "You helped me do more than survive, you helped me live. We helped each other." Reed put his arm around her shoulders. "I was just existing before you came along. You reminded me what it was like to really be alive." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise over their land. This was their legacy, Hannah thought. Not just the physical property, but the life they had built. The children they were raising to be good people. The students Hannah taught. The friends and neighbors they had helped over the years, just as others had helped them. The sound of voices drifted up from the house. James and Grace were up, probably arguing about something as they always did. Hannah could hear Thomas's quieter voice trying to mediate between them. A smile crossed her face. "We should go back," she said, "before they burn down the kitchen trying to make breakfast. Probably wise." But Reed did not move immediately. "Thank you, Hannah, for saying yes all those years ago, for taking a chance on a cowboy who fell in love too fast. Thank you for opening your door on a snowy night, for offering shelter to a desperate woman." She kissed him softly. "For keeping your promise that I would never have to ask for shelter again." They walked back down the hill hand in hand, toward the house that held their family and their life together. The morning sun painted everything golden, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its complicated song. As they reached the house, James burst out the door, nearly knocking them over in his enthusiasm. "Ma, Pa, come quick. Grace is teaching Thomas to ride, and he actually stayed on for more than 5 seconds." Hannah and Reed exchanged a glance and laughed, then followed their son around to the corral where Grace had indeed gotten her younger brother up on one of the gentler horses. Thomas, his face a mixture of terror and exhilaration, clung to the saddle horn while Grace led the horse in a slow circle. "Look at me," Thomas called out when he saw his parents. "I am riding. You are doing great," Hannah called back, even as her heart climbed into her throat at the sight of her baby on a horse. Reed squeezed her hand. "He will be fine. Grace knows what she is doing," and he was right. Grace was patient and careful, and by the time breakfast was ready, Thomas had managed several circles around the corral without help. He was beaming with pride when he finally dismounted. The 4 of them ate together, the conversation lively and loud as always. James talked about the new foal that had been born the night before. Grace declared she wanted to enter the horse race at the county fair. Thomas wanted to know if they could get more books from Thompson, because he had already read all the ones in the house twice. This was Hannah's life now. Messy and loud and full of love. So different from the cold, desperate woman who had stumbled through a snowstorm 20 years ago, certain she was going to die alone in the desert. She had been desperate enough to ask for shelter, and Reed Mercer had given her so much more. He had given her a home, a family, and a love that had grown stronger with each passing year. She had not known, standing on his porch that night with frozen fingers and chattering teeth, that she was knocking on the door that would lead to the rest of her life. But Reed had known, or at least suspected. He had looked at her, half frozen and desperate, and seen not a burden but a possibility. He had opened his door and his heart, and in doing so, had saved them both. The years continued to flow past like the creek through their property, sometimes rushing, sometimes meandering, but always moving forward. James eventually married a girl from Thompson, a rancher's daughter named Sarah, who proved to be as capable as she was kind. They built a house on the far edge of Reed and Hannah's property and started their own family, giving Reed and Hannah 3 grandchildren in rapid succession. Grace, true to her independent nature, took longer to settle down. She traveled to California, worked as a horse trainer, and came back at 25 with a quiet man named Daniel who adored her. They married in the same church where Reed and Hannah had wed, with Father Miguel's successor performing the ceremony. Grace and Daniel decided to stay on the ranch, with Daniel working alongside Reed and James while Grace continued to train horses. Thomas, as Hannah had suspected, pursued education. He went east to college, something that made Hannah immensely proud even as she missed him terribly. He came back during summers, full of stories about the wider world, but always glad to return to Arizona. He eventually became a teacher himself, taking over Hannah's small school and expanding it. Reed and Hannah watched their children and grandchildren grow and found themselves settling into a different phase of life. They were no longer young, but neither were they old. They had reached that comfortable middle ground where they knew themselves and each other so well that words were often unnecessary. On quiet evenings, they would climb the hill to the bench Reed had built and watch the sun set over their land. Sometimes they talked, reminiscing about the early days or making plans for the future. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, content with each other's presence. One such evening, when Hannah was 50 and Reed was 54, they sat on their bench watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and purple. The desert air was cooling, bringing relief from the day's heat. In the distance, they could see the lights coming on in their children's houses. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if that storm had not happened? Reed asked. Hannah considered the question. Sometimes. I suppose I would have made it to Naco eventually, gotten that teaching position. I would have had a life, but it would not have been this life. Do you ever regret it? Marrying so quickly, tying yourself to a ranch and a cowboy? Not once, not even on the hard days. Hannah leaned against his shoulder. What about you? Do you regret taking in a half-frozen stranger? Taking you in was the smartest thing I ever did. Reed kissed the top of her head. You gave me a reason to live again. Before you came, I was just going through the motions. After Alina died, I thought that was it for me. One love, one chance, and then you knocked on my door. And you said I would never have to ask for shelter again. I meant it, every word. They sat together as the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. The land around them was peaceful, the kind of deep quiet that comes at the end of a good day. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out and another answered. Hannah thought about the path that had led her here. The loss of her parents, the journey west, the broken stage, the storm. Any one of those events could have turned out differently, and her whole life would have changed. But they had happened exactly as they needed to, leading her to this man, this place, this life. I need to tell you something, Reed said, breaking the comfortable silence. Hannah heard something in his voice that made her sit up straighter. What is it? I have been feeling tired lately. More than I should, and there is a pain in my chest sometimes. Fear clutched at Hannah's heart. Have you seen a doctor? I went to Tucson last month when I took those cattle to market. The doctor said my heart is not as strong as it used to be. He told me to slow down, take it easier. And you are just now telling me this. Hannah's voice came out sharper than she intended, but she could not help it. The thought of losing Reed made her feel like the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. I did not want to worry you, and the doctor said it is not immediate. But I need to start letting James and Daniel take on more of the heavy work. I need to accept that I am not young anymore. Hannah took his hand, holding it tightly. We will figure this out together. You will slow down, and I will make sure you do not overdo it. We have too much life left to live for you to be reckless. I am not ready to leave you. Then do not. Follow the doctor's orders and be sensible. She touched his face, feeling the familiar planes and angles that she knew as well as her own. I am not ready to lose you either. That night marked a shift in their lives. Reed did as the doctor ordered and began stepping back from the hardest physical work. It was difficult for him, a man who had always prided himself on his strength and capability. But James and Daniel stepped up, taking on the responsibilities without complaint. Hannah found herself watching Reed more closely, noticing when he seemed tired or short of breath. She adjusted their meals, making sure he ate well but not too heavily. She insisted on their evening walks, keeping him active without overdoing it. And she prayed, more fervently than she had since she was a child, that they would have many more years together. The years that followed were gentle ones. Reed's condition remained stable as long as he was careful. He spent more time with the grandchildren, teaching them about the ranch and telling them stories. He helped Thomas with the school, doing repairs and building new desks. He and Hannah traveled to Tucson occasionally, staying with friends and enjoying a change of scenery. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. All three of their children were there with their spouses and children. Friends from town came, many of whom had been at their wedding 3 decades earlier. It was a day of laughter and stories, of children running wild and adults reminiscing. Late in the afternoon, Father Diego, the current priest at the mission, offered a blessing for Reed and Hannah. He spoke about the example they had set, about building a marriage that lasted through challenges and changes. He talked about the legacy they were leaving, not just in property and possessions, but in the people they had raised and influenced. As Hannah listened to his words, she looked around at the gathered crowd. Her children, strong and capable, building their own lives while staying close to home. Her grandchildren, healthy and happy. The students she had taught over the years, some now adults with children of their own. The neighbors and friends who had become like family. This was what that snowy night had led to. This abundance of love and life. When the party finally wound down and the last guests departed, Reed and Hannah climbed their hill one more time. The bench showed its age now, weathered by years of sun and occasional rain, but it was still solid, still their place. 30 years, Reed said, settling onto the bench with a satisfied sigh. Longer than I ever dared hope when I opened that door and found you on my porch. You looked so surprised, Hannah remembered. This big, strong cowboy, and you had no idea what to do with a half-frozen woman. I knew exactly what to do. I knew from that first moment that you were going to change my life. Did you really? Maybe not consciously. But something in me recognized something in you. Reed pulled her close. My heart knew, even if my head took a little longer to catch up. They watched the sun set as they had done countless times before. The land spread out before them, familiar and beloved. The house where they had raised their children. The barn where Reed had spent so many hours working. The school where Hannah had taught generations of students, all of it glowing gold and orange in the fading light. If I could go back and do it all again, Hannah said softly, I would not change a single thing. Not even the storm, not even the storm, because it brought me here, to you. Reed held her as the stars began to emerge. Neither of them spoke, but they did not need to. After 30 years of marriage, they had learned the language of silence, the communication that happened in the spaces between words. The years that followed were marked by the inevitable changes that come with age. Reed's heart condition worsened gradually, forcing him to slow down even more. Hannah developed arthritis that made her hands ache, making it harder to sew and write. But they adapted, finding new ways to contribute and staying involved in the life of the ranch and community. James took over more of the ranch management, though he always consulted with Reed on major decisions. Grace and Daniel expanded the horse training business, gaining a reputation that brought buyers from as far away as California. Thomas's school grew to include 20 regular students, and he added a small library funded by donations from families throughout the area. Reed and Hannah became the patriarch and matriarch of a growing family. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren. The house that had once held just the two of them now rang with young voices on Sundays and holidays. Hannah kept a jar of peppermints for visiting children and told them stories about the old days, when Arizona was still a territory and Naco was barely more than a crossroads. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family gathered again for a celebration. This time, it was a smaller, quieter affair. Reed tired easily now, and Hannah's arthritis meant she could no longer stand for long periods. But the love was just as strong, perhaps even stronger for being tested and proven over 4 decades. 40 years, Hannah said that evening as they sat on the porch, the party going on inside without them. We have been married 40 years. Best 40 years of my life, Reed said. His voice was weaker now, his breathing sometimes labored, but his eyes were still bright when he looked at her. Every single day, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones, those are the days that proved what we had was real. Hannah reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. They sat together watching the sun set as they had done thousands of times before. The ritual never grew old, never lost its meaning. You remember what you said to me that first night? Hannah asked, as she often did, It had become a touchstone for them, this moment from their beginning. I said a lot of things. You said I would never have to ask for shelter again. And I meant it. Reed squeezed her hand gently. I hope I kept that promise. You did. You gave me shelter and so much more. You gave me a home, Reed Mercer. You gave me a life. We gave each other that gift. Reed was quiet for a moment, then added softly, I hope I have enough time left to see one more Christmas, to see all the little ones open their presents. The words sent a chill through Hannah, but she kept her voice steady. You will see many more Christmases. Maybe. But if I do not, I need you to know something. Reed turned to face her fully. You were the greatest blessing of my life. Meeting you, loving you, building this family with you. If I died tomorrow, I would die a happy man. Do not talk like that. Hannah, we are not young anymore. We have to face the truth. His thumb rubbed across her knuckles, the gesture as familiar as breathing. But the truth is, I am not afraid. How could I be afraid when I have had such a beautiful life? Hannah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I am not ready to lose you. I am not ready to leave. But when the time comes, you will be all right. You are the strongest person I know. Reed wiped away her tears with his weathered hand. Promise me something, anything. Promise me you will not stop living when I am gone. Keep teaching, keep telling our story, keep loving our family. Do not let grief swallow you the way it almost swallowed me after Alina died. Reed. Promise me, Hannah. She took a shaky breath. I promise, but you have to promise me something too. What is that? Promise me you will fight, that you will not give up easily. We still have time left and I want every moment of it. I promise. They held each other as darkness fell, drawing strength from 4 decades of shared life. And true to his word, Reed did fight. He made it to Christmas, and to the one after that. He saw another grandchild born and watched Thomas's school graduate its first class of students who had been with him from the beginning. But 2 years after their 40th anniversary, on a warm spring morning, Reed Mercer passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Hannah beside him holding his hand. He was 68 years old and had lived to see the Arizona Territory become a state, though just barely. The funeral was held at the Mission Church in Naco, which was overflowing with people. It seemed like everyone in southern Arizona came to pay their respects to Reed Mercer. They told stories about his fairness as a rancher, his generosity to neighbors in need, his love for his family. They spoke of a man who had built something lasting in a harsh land, but it was Hannah's words that people remembered most. She stood at the front of the church, her children and grandchildren surrounding her, and spoke from the heart. My husband once told me that I walked into his life during a storm and brought the sunshine back, she said, her voice steady despite her grief. But the truth is, we brought the sunshine to each other. Reed gave me shelter on the worst night of my life, and he never stopped sheltering me. He gave me love when I thought I would always be alone. He gave me a family when I thought I had lost everyone I cared about. And he gave me 42 years of partnership that I will treasure for the rest of my days. She paused, looking at the simple coffin that held the man she had loved for more than half her life. Reed told me once that sometimes you just know, deep down, that someone is right for you. He knew it the night I knocked on his door, and I knew it the next morning when he said I would never have to ask for shelter again. We built a beautiful life together on that foundation of knowing, and I am grateful for every single day we had. After the funeral, after the reception, after all the guests had gone home, Hannah found herself climbing the hill to their bench. Her children had offered to come with her, but she needed this time alone. She needed to sit in the place they had shared so many evenings and say her private goodbye. The bench looked the same as always, weathered but solid. Hannah sat down and looked out over the land that she and Reed had built together. Their children's houses, the school, The barn and pastures, all of it bathed in the golden light of sunset. "I kept my promise," she said aloud, speaking to Reed though he was no longer there to hear her. "I did not give up. I stood up in front of everyone and told our story, but Reed, I do not know how to do this without you." The wind blew softly across the desert, carrying the scent of sage and creosote. A bird sang somewhere nearby. The world kept turning, indifferent to her grief. "I will try," she continued. "I will keep teaching and loving our family. I will keep this place going the way you would want. But I miss you already. I miss you so much it feels like I cannot breathe." She sat on the bench until the stars came out, talking to Reed about everything and nothing. About the grandchildren, about plans for the ranch, about her fears and hopes. And somehow, in the speaking, she felt a little of the weight lift from her chest. Over the months and years that followed, Hannah did indeed keep her promises. She continued teaching, though she had to cut back her hours. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, making sure they knew their father's stories. She kept the ranch going with James's help, making decisions and maintaining traditions. She also made sure that Reed's grave, in the small cemetery beside the mission church, always had fresh flowers. She visited him regularly, sometimes with family members but often alone. She would sit beside his headstone and tell him about her day, about what was happening on the ranch, about the family they had created together. Life went on as it always does. Hannah watched her grandchildren grow into adults. She held great-great-grandchildren and marveled at the family tree that had grown from that snowy night when she had knocked on a stranger's door. She saw the school Thomas had built grow into a proper institution, educating children from throughout the region. On what would have been her and Reed's 50th wedding anniversary, Hannah climbed the hill to their bench one more time. She was 80 now, and the climb was difficult, but she made it with the help of a walking stick James had carved for her. She sat on the bench and looked out over the land. 50 years, she said aloud. "Can you believe it, Reed? 50 years since we promised to love each other forever. I like to think I kept that promise, even though you are not here to see it." The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and purple, painting the desert in colors that never failed to take her breath away. Hannah felt at peace in a way she had not since Reed's death. She had done what she promised. She had lived, truly lived, and not just existed. "I think I am ready," she said softly. "Ready to see you again. I have done everything I needed to do here. I have raised our children and watched them raise theirs. I have taught generations of students. I have kept our story alive, and I have loved you every single day, even when you were not here beside me." The wind picked up, blowing her gray hair across her face. She pushed it back and smiled. "When I see you again, the first thing I am going to tell you is thank you. Thank you for opening your door on that snowy night. Thank you for looking at a desperate stranger and seeing someone worth saving. Thank you for loving me enough to build a whole life with me." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but they were not entirely sad. "Winter made me desperate enough to ask, and you said I would never have to ask for shelter again. You kept that promise for 42 years while you were alive, and somehow I have felt sheltered by your love for the 8 years since you have been gone." She sat on the bench as the sun disappeared below the horizon, watching the stars come out one by one. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a desperate woman fleeing a storm to the matriarch of a thriving family. She thought about Reed, about his kindness and strength and unwavering love. She thought about the shelter he had given her, not just physical shelter but emotional, spiritual, a sense of belonging she had never known before. As full darkness fell, Hannah made her way carefully back down the hill. James was waiting at the bottom, ready to help her if she needed it. He did not ask what she had been doing up there. He knew. They all knew that the bench was her special place, hers and Reed's. "Are you all right, Ma?" he asked as they walked back to the house. "I am perfect," Hannah said, and she meant it. "I was just talking to your father." "What did you tell him?" "That I am grateful for all of it. For the storm that brought me here, for his kindness, for our life together, for you and your siblings." She patted James's arm. "I am a very lucky woman, James. Not many people get to live a love story like ours." Hannah lived for another 5 years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85. The family gathered once more at the mission church, which was expanded now to handle the larger congregation. They buried her beside Reed, under a cottonwood tree that provided shade in the summer heat. On her headstone, James had inscribed the words she had requested. She asked for shelter and found a home. The Mercer Ranch continued for generations, passed down through James's line. The bench on the hill became a family landmark, a place where Mercers went when they needed to think or remember. The story of Reed and Hannah became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. And in the telling, the story took on a life of its own. It became a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best things. That kindness to strangers can change the world. That love can bloom in the most unexpected places. That a single decision to open a door or ask for help can alter the course of everything that follows. Years later, one of Hannah's great-great-granddaughters, a girl named Lily, climbed the hill to the famous bench. She was 18 and trying to decide whether to go away to college or stay and help on the ranch. She sat on the weathered wood and looked out over the land that her ancestors had built. She thought about Hannah, that desperate woman who had knocked on a stranger's door. She thought about Reed, who had opened his heart to someone he did not know. She thought about the courage it took to say yes to love when everything was uncertain. And sitting there, watching the sun set over the Arizona desert, Lily understood. She understood that her family's story was not just about a ranch or land or even love, though it was definitely about love. It was about choosing to see possibilities instead of limitations. It was about having the courage to ask for help when you needed it, and the generosity to give help when you could. She stood up from the bench and ran her hand along the carved names, worn smooth by decades of weather and touching hands. Reed and Hannah Mercer. A cowboy and a teacher. A man offering shelter and a woman desperate enough to ask for it. Two people who had built something lasting out of a moment of need. As Lily walked back down the hill, she realized she had her answer. She would stay. Not out of obligation, but because this land, this family, this legacy mattered. It was worth preserving and building on. Just as Hannah had built on the shelter Reed offered, creating a home and a family that lasted long after both of them were gone. The sun set over the Mercer Ranch, just as it had done countless times before. The land stretched away toward the mountains, golden in the fading light. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses whickered. The wind whispered through the sage, carrying stories of the past and promises of the future. And on a hill overlooking it all, a weathered bench stood as a testament to a love that had started with a desperate plea and a generous response. A love that had built something beautiful and lasting. A love that reminded everyone who heard the story that sometimes, in our darkest moments, we find our way home. Winter had made Hannah Thompson desperate enough to ask for shelter. Reed Mercer had said she would never have to ask again. And in keeping that simple promise, they had created a legacy that would endure for generations, a reminder that love, kindness, and courage can transform everything. The end.